Let's talk Star Wars.
Okay, let's go. I just wanted to start off and say that I really loved this film when it came out, and even with its faults and the things that I don't like about it, I just think the parts that are so good work so well that I just overlook the parts and can appreciate the parts that really work.
And I guess I will counter that by saying that I did not like the movie that much, because though what I thought it did really well, it had really high highs, to me, the lows were too low to forgive, and I just couldn't overlook a few major things that really took me out of the experience. I think the thing that bothered me first upon my second rewatch was there's no context for where we are in this universe. There's not enough world building, and it hurts me to say this, that we need more politics to know what's going on in this world. We have the First Order, and we have the Resistance. Well, the First Order is just the First Order. Do they, what are they? Rey says at one point that within weeks they'll control all the major systems. Well, what major systems are those? Because we saw in the previous film, which, remember, happens immediately prior to this film, to the point that there's a literal continuation of that final scene in this movie. The Republic, which I thought were the major systems, was destroyed. And so, what's left? Who are these people? Are we just watching are we watching just warring, warlords? Is it just Snoke versus Leia? Is that all? There's not enough framing of what is happening, and so you lose that meaning, that significance of what these characters are doing. Sure, you get the Skywalkers and their, the Skywalker family tree quarreling and the good versus evil in that respect, but half of the movie has no context to what's happening except, well, it's a Star Wars movie, and so we have to have Star Wars things happen. That really struck me right off the bat this time, and it didn't bother me when I first watched it, because, of course, I was, taking in all of the dialogue and the scenery, and so, but upon my second rewatch, I didn't know what was going on, or why we were doing what was going on.
I will add to that, as, like I said, I do really love this film, but I do have to agree that there really is a lot of scenes that don't need to be there. Just about everything that doesn't involve Kylo, Rey, or Luke could basically be cut from the film, and you wouldn't have lost anything. I mean, this film is really long, and upon my third rewatch of it, not in the big screen and actually, writing a review, this movie was a lot longer than I thought it was, because when you're in the theater, you don't really, realize that you've been there for, 3 hours. But I agree, some of the characters, they weren't really developed very well, and I feel like they could have, if they wanted these characters to be there, they could have done a better job at implementing these characters and having actual purpose to their stories.
Yeah, my other big thing of the three major things that I think bother me is the characters that we're told are important characters, like Poe. Poe gets a lot of screen time despite being an idiot the whole time. And, and Rose, who is a counterpoint to Finn. And even Finn himself. And, Holdo gets lots of screen time. All of these characters act only because the script tells them to do this. I wrote a note specifically that says, the only reason Poe says, we're going to keep this specifically need to know, and Holdo doesn't need to know, the only reason he says that is because the plot tells him to. To me, everything else we've seen from Poe, who is this gung-ho, he's the top resistance fighter, he would immediately take this plan and go right to the leadership and say, this is what we need to do. Because he's a leader. He's not a sneaking around, having an actual mutiny that they refer to as a mutiny. He's not that. He's a leader. He's the lead fighter pilot. He was a commander, which is not correct in actual naval terms, which is another thing that took me out of the film. That it would have taken 2 seconds to realize that captain is higher than commander. So he gets promoted But he's a commander of, assuming, their whole squadron of the individual fighter pilots, and you don't get that way by being selfish. You don't get that. I understand that Poe's character arc is to, learn that he needs to, sometimes stop and think some more. But he's a leader, and what the leader would do in that situation is inform as many people as possible of this plan that he was so sure of. You could have changed that. It was just as matter of he brings it to Holdo and immediately gets shot down by the Vice Admiral, and then maybe they decide to do something. But even something like that would have made that decision make more sense. But it didn't, because the script didn't say that. The script said, nope, we keep this specifically need to know it's the three of us and we're going to fix this, not this resistance or rebellion or whatever they went by at that point. Not the team. He's a team player. That we saw that in The Force Awakens. All he cared about was he was so friendly and open to Finn right away. He was all about the team. Bring it in. We can help. We can get through this together. And he didn't do any of that. There's other situations like that come up in the film that I feel like the only reason they are saying or doing things is because the plot told them to, and not because that character that we were established moments before this movie started, we were at the end of the previous film. Literal moments. So how long was Finn in his, cryo state? It apparently is no time at all. They put him in at the very end of that film when Rey flies away, and then the very next thing that they do is they're here on this bombing run.
Building off that, same thing with Admiral Holdo. If she had just told Finn and Poe the plan, you would have cut out all the things that I have a problem with in this film, because there are a lot of moments where these characters that we're supposed to care about, but because they're not allowed to be themselves and they're just serving the plot, they're very cringy and almost feel poorly acted, and that's because they're only being these plot characters.
I had one more point.
Okay. Just
on that, and it was making the resistance or rebellion look incompetent. I understand you have to, knock them down from their success. The Empire Strikes Back did that. They blew up the Death Star. It was the greatest thing that the rebellion had ever done, but actually, in the grand context of an actual war, the rebellion had been a pest at that point that was, popping up and interfering with things, but otherwise nobody really was taking them that seriously. They were, kind of hunting for the rebel base to try and squash it. But once they blew up the Death Star, now it was, okay, Darth Vader, use all of the resources you have to put this out, because they blew up the Death Star. And so I understand, and so we start off, Battle of Hoth is the rebels getting completely ruined. Their whole, they were hiding out, basically just waiting for the first sign that they were going to have Imperials on them, and then they had to leave. It was immediate. They knew immediately they were going to have to leave, because they were just hiding out, trying to regroup, trying to, gain, what are they going to do next? And there was none of that in this film. Immediately we're going on a bombing run, and yes, I guess, in the arrogance, again, we're going to show the arrogance of Poe, and he's going to get, he's got to get taken down a few pegs. But they did it by making the resistance look incompetent, and that's not sympathetic as the audience. We're we grow to resent these characters that are the heroes of this movie.
But yes, if Admiral Holdo had just told them the plan, we would have cut out that whole unnecessary middle segment, and we would have gotten to spend more time with our actual main characters that were acted very well. As my counterpoint, for, not all the characters were acted poorly, because Luke, Kylo, and I guess Rey's just kind of along for the ride.
Luke, and I'll say this because you said kind of Rey. Kylo and Rey's relationship with each other is a character that has a beautiful arc, even though Rey kind of just gets pulled along for the ride.
Those characters are really compelling and really good. You have a lot of interesting things of Rey thinking of Luke as this grand master, this legend, and finds out he's just some guy who messed up and doesn't know where to go next. And she wants him to be all these things that they need, and she's like, oh, you need to take down the First Order. You're going to be the one to change the tide. And Luke's like, no, I'm just some old guy. I really like this film, and because of that reason of not just with Luke, but they have this idea of introducing a concept that you think is going to go one way and then goes the complete other way. such as Admiral Hodo. When you are first introduced to her, and you think she's like this kind of like cowardice person, she's like, I don't like, you know, doesn't really deserve this, that she hates our main characters, so she's this kind of like mini antagonist herself. And then at the end of her arc, you find out that she's actually like is heroic and she does the right thing. She had a plan all along. Same thing with Luke. You start off thinking this is going to be the Luke right out of Return of the Jedi, and it's like, no, this is completely different. We don't even know who this guy is. But then at the end of his arc, the true Luke shines through and you can actually see his character. Another one is DJ, the smuggler. You think he's going to be a Lando Calrissian type, or just like he starts off bad and then he betrays them and then he comes back and saves them at the end. But no, in this movie, he never comes back. He never saves them. He doesn't care if they live or die. He's not Lando, but he was introduced to make you think he's a Lando-type character.
As a counterpoint to it's not what you expected when it's introduced, I think that it goes too far. I think that his implementation of that was a little too heavy-handed, in that it starts to cater to what things start to happen because the audience is expecting something different. And the big one for me that really doesn't sit with me is the whole Rey going on her dark side to the cave, mirror, whatever it was, trip, which is supposed to be what Luke did on Dagobah, which is, he goes into the cave to, learn about what the dark side is and learn about what he needs to do, and that, he needs to resist this call because it will tell you it has what you want. But then he sees in the cave that if he does that, he'll turn into Darth Vader. That's what happened to Darth Vader. And so Rey doesn't get any of that. She goes down and then she finds nothing. And so you spend what feels like days watching this scene that ultimately amounts to nothing, because she gets nothing out of it, which is fine if you were trying to make a point, but the movie doesn't have an idea of what point it's trying to make. It's just there to, have the audience hold their breath and be like, what are we going to find in here? Are we going to see her parents? Who's her parents? We're dying to know who Rey's parents are, and it's just for the audience. Then once upon a second viewing, when you know what comes out of that, it's just like boring. Nothing happens. Whereas, I can really watch The Empire Strikes Back 100 times. That scene in the cave still has this era of, because you know that Darth Vader's going to come out of nowhere. Suddenly, it's the jump scare, the out of nowhere, and and Darth Vader's lightsaber is on, and you're like, whoa, we gotta fight, and then that's what ultimately is what would lead Luke to the dark side. So it stays very powerful, even though you know what's coming, and you don't get that with Rey's experience. And to me, it's just there to, then have a scene, have Rey be so obsessed with who her parents are because the audience, the fans, are so obsessed with who her parents are. So we can then pull the rug out from under us and say, nah, they're nobody. You knew that. And so it's like, why do we need to do that? We didn't need to do that on screen. We didn't need to see any of that.
I agree, because it's like a 5-minute scene that easily could have been trimmed down or completely cut out. And like you said, Rey is only obsessed with who her parents are because the audience is. In episode 7, she's not moping about her parents. She's a little curious, but for the most part, she doesn't really give it a second thought. She's more of I want to get off Jakku. I want to, explore the universe. I'm a starry-eyed, adventurer type. In this movie, she's completely I'm so fixated on this one point that was never even a question until now. Yeah, I honestly think the whole scene, that's one of the few things that it's again, obviously there's the whole Finn and Rose on the casino planet that could have been cut out, but this is another one that your movie's already so long, you really could have cut this down or cut it out completely. You start the scene where she falls into the water, goes up to the mirror, puts her hand on the mirror, it's immediately her reflection, and then it cuts to her, talking to Kylo about it. How it's I don't know what I expected to find because I found nothing. It was just a mirror.
Yeah, if the point of the scene is to illustrate that what was dangerous about that was the call to the dark side, which is the point, it's the same point as The Empire Strikes Back, is the dark side will tell you it can give you what you want. And that's what lures you to using it. It doesn't ever actually give you what you want. It Yoda says it in The Phantom Menace that, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. It just, you lead through the dark side just leads to this path of suffering. It's evil. It's George Lucas penned it, which I like that they stuck to strictly. There is a good side and an evil side to this force. And the evil side of that force has no business other than to make things suffer. And I liked that they really stuck with that. It would have been much more benefited to get 5 minutes of her talking to Kylo about her experience, because Kylo is very, very in depth with the dark side and could have told her what it gives you or whatever. There could have been anything else that could have happened that you could have spent more time with, that they then instead, again, it's just about building up all this anticipation so we can have the rug pulling later.
I will say this about the other aspects of the Force that they talk about in this film. They talk about it very well, whereas the prequels talked about it too much and didn't really, they try to make it down to a science. In this film, they give you just enough information that you already knew while still giving you new mythos to add into your idea of the Force and what it is and what it can do.
I do have a little bit of a problem of, like I mentioned before, I interjected before to say that I think that the relationship of Kylo and Rey has a very strong character arc as they progress through communicating to each other. At first, it's very, standoffish, and they're very much enemies, and but then they start to kind of accept that they're going to have to keep doing this, and then they start to accept that maybe there's a reason they're doing this, and then they both think, we're doing this on purpose, and it's because I can turn the other one to, to the opposing side. And so then they actually start to look forward to that, because both of them feel as though they can turn the other one. And they start to feel as though that's what they're meant to do. They start to feel this destiny. So that relationship arc actually is very strong. But I still feel like Rey kind of just gets dragged along on a string, and that she doesn't really grow or develop. And a lot of that, to me, is not any writing on Rey's part or any poor acting on Daisy Ridley's part. It really, to me, is just she doesn't have any time we pick her up literally from the scene we left her off on at the end of the next film, the end of the previous film. And so she doesn't get any time to change. And so that, to me, is just a stylistic choice to me that I feel like the movie would have been better to not be immediately after the conclusion of the previous one.
Right. I think it would be better if maybe when you go back, you see Rey has been trying, I don't know, it's implied that she's been trying for days or weeks to try to get Luke to even just talk to her, and Luke is just being go away, dismissive, and but I also agree with what you were saying about how Kylo and Rey talking to each other is really strong. And honestly, the reason it works so well for me is because Rey is really naive to she's too naive to realize that Kylo is trying to manipulate her, and that there's no way he'd actually change to the light after he's spent so long trying to change away from the light. And then Kylo, he really can't let go of his pasts. No matter what he tries to do, he's always holding on to this past. Despite his mantra through the whole film being, let go of the past, let it die, he physically can't let go. So in that final, one of the final scenes where they're in the throne room and they've just gone through this huge fight together, and it's please just leave everything behind, come with me so we can leave our past together. And when Rey Rey doesn't want to let go, because she's no, come with me, we can fix everything. And he's no, you can't let go. And because he can't let go. Another part about Luke and Rey's characters that I really enjoy, that I don't know if it was completely intentional, but I think it probably had to be, was their fighting styles. When you see Rey fighting with her staff or her lightsaber, and she looks like just some kid who just picked up a stick and is swinging it around randomly. It doesn't really have a form, and she's just trying to hope it works. Then you see Luke. Whenever Luke uses a staff, a lightsaber, or just is using the Force, you can feel his presence. You know he's a master. Everything he does has this power and grace, and you're that is a master Jedi. That is Luke Skywalker. this is what he would have become at the end of Return of the Jedi. As he continued his training, he would have eventually made it to this level of complete mastery of his abilities. A good example of this is when they're fighting together in the rain. After Kylo and Rey had their conversation, Luke comes in, sees that they're talking to the Force because he just reconnected with the Force, and is like, stop, and blows up the thing, and Rey's like, I've had it with you, you're just like, like, I can do this and that, and he's just like, no, you can't, I know what's gonna happen, and he's like, I can't, like, teach this to you because you're too stubborn, so she starts fighting him, and he immediately, like, is toying with her, he's just, like, kicking her butt. And it isn't until she pulls out a lightsaber and Luke doesn't have his lightsaber that he finally has to, like, let her win. And let her go off on her own. But if he had his lightsaber, it would be no contest. The other thing I want to bring up is that in the film, there are 3 different versions of the Luke attacking Kylo Ren, Ben Solo. The first version we are presented with is the version that Luke tells himself. This is what he wants to believe happened, that he had sensed this darkness growing in his apprentice, and he had no choice but to, like, confront him about it. And when he confronted him in the calm manner, Kylo Ren lashed out and attacked him. Then you hear Ben's version of the story, which is twisted and full of hate and confusion, and it's this, no, I was sleeping peacefully, and suddenly this madman burst into my room with a lightsaber ready to kill me, and I had to defend myself. Then, finally, after the scene in the rain, you get the truth of what actually happened. Luke did confront Kylo while he was sleeping, and could feel the darkness building inside him, and in a moment of pure instinct and terror, he ignited his lightsaber, only to immediately realize he had made the wrong decision. But then Ben woke up, misunderstood the situation, and was too powerful for Luke to stop in that moment.
Which is a mirror of what happens to Luke in Return of the Jedi. When he's beaten down on Darth Vader, cuts his hand off, and then suddenly, in this moment, he's ready to go. He's ready to just, beat this man into submission because of, all that he's done to him, in the previous film, and then he cuts the hand off, and he's like, oh my god, what am I doing? This is what happens. This is what I saw in the cave. And so, because, of course, he cuts off the hand, it's a robot hand, and he's like, look at it, he's like, I already have the robot hand. This is exactly like a mirror, exact mirror of what happened in the cave. Brilliant visual storytelling. So, it's not like you would never see that from Luke. We already saw that in a more extreme manner. He actually realizes it sooner in this case. And it just goes... To me, it really paints this picture of that Luke is this, he's not this legend. He is just a person. He's like everybody else. He's doing the best he can to feel his way through this thing that he thinks is the right thing to do, but he really ultimately makes a lot of mistakes, just like the rest of us. What really sells this is Mark Hamill's performance. Mark Hamill, best known as Luke Skywalker, but everybody agrees his best work is his voice acting. You can tell he's a voice actor because he changes his voice very naturally, depending on what he's trying to do. When he's genuinely curious, it sounds genuinely curious. When he's, who are you, Rey from nowhere? He's kind of joking around with her because he's, being Luke. He's kind of, joking around, right? He's picked up a little, kind of a little bit of sarcasm from Han. He's genuine interest about who this person is. When he's, talking to R2-D2. And R2-D2, shows him the clip from New Hope. And he's like, that's a cheap move. That, straight up, the voice is straight. He could have just took off 40 years off his life. And you could have just taken that clip from Return of the Jedi. It sounds so much like Luke from 40 years ago. It really feels like Mark Hamill is acting as Luke, who is acting as... No, I don't care. I'm a failure. I'm putting up this wall. I don't care about you. I can't help you. You feel that. You feel him struggle, and it breaks through occasionally, and he does this all with his voice, because he's not a very particularly expressive facial actor, or a very emotive actor where he comes across with emotions except in his voice. It's all in his voice, and he brings across that, that there's this Luke inside that's dying to get out and be the hero that he is, that he isn't like, he's trying so hard to repress, and you get that all in Mark Hamill's voice, and it really makes the movie work for me. The last 50 minutes, the last third of the 150-minute movie, really all suddenly now feels like Star Wars. Before, it had felt like, yeah, there's some things happening, there's a plot going on that happens to take place in a world that looks like Star Wars, but at about the 100-minute mark, we get to the planet, the Salt Planet Crate, and the AT-ATs come out, and they're all trapped. They don't know what they're going to do, and Luke shows up in his Return of the Jedi, and he starts toying with Kylo, and that's where it starts to feel like Star Wars. The movie really builds a lot of momentum going into the end of the film to really get you into the next one. I love the little homages to the other characters, particularly Han, who is only brought up once explicitly by name. There's just homages to him that these people have lived together for a long time. They were 20 years went by between Return of the Jedi and this new trilogy that we don't see. But you feel like that they've all kind of picked up things from each other. Luke says to Kylo, and he just looks at him and he's like, "See you around, kid." Awesome. One of the best lines in the movie. Second, to me, only to when Princess Leia looks at C-3PO at the very beginning of the film and says, "Wipe that look off your face." Could have been something Han Solo said to C-3PO in The Empire Strikes Back. In fact, he might have even said, "Don't look at me like that." Which, of course, C-3PO is like, "What? This is just my face." It felt so much like Han, and it just, these characters that we'd missed for so long really came across in this film. Upon further reflection, now that I've watched the movie more than once, I came out of the very first viewing, and I really liked it, as is when you watch a movie, but the longer I thought about it, the less I liked it. Maybe that was reading some things I had seen on the internet and buying into some good points. I had a couple of friends that didn't like it that much, and so I started to think really down on it. But, for a movie that I said was not one of my favorite Star Wars films, it really is fourth on my list. It comes together. There are a lot of strengths, and it really is a well-executed film. It's not the best Star Wars film, but it's one of the better films that I saw last year.
Whereas I went into my third viewing thinking, I can't wait to write a review of this movie. This is like basically my new favorite Star Wars film. I absolutely loved it. Saw it twice in theaters. This is going to be the best. Watching it again on a small screen by myself, actually looking at it from the review standpoint, not just a wide-eyed moviegoer and a Star Wars fan, there were some serious problems with this film. It didn't, the flow kind of felt like it was off for most of it. And while I still love it, it's still either my second or third favorite. It's not as powerful and great as I originally thought when I was watching it in the theater. And that's because it wasn't, I had more time to think on it. Obviously the good scenes are still great, and I still love them. But the bad scenes really were, they just felt like they dragged on. It's a lot of it felt unnecessary. The entire casino planet could be completely cut out. The whole plan with the Vice Admiral Holdo not being just tell people the plan. Boom, you just lost good half hour of your movie. You still have 2 hours of movie, and I feel like Poe, Finn, Rose, they all needed to be better explored if we're gonna spend that much time with them. But like I said, the scenes that were really good and really worked, absolutely loved, and they were definitely worth the price of admission. Alright, thank you all for watching. If you liked it, leave a like to let me know. Don't forget to subscribe. And if there's any movies you'd like to see me review in the future, feel free to let me know. The next movie I will be reviewing is Bionicle. I've talked about that before, but I would like to go back and actually watch the film before I talk about it again. Man, this is twice in a row now he hasn't called me. I wonder what's keeping him. Whatever. I'll finally get some peace and quiet from him. Take care.
Where is my rope? It was right here. Whoa! What are you doing?
Let's talk Star Wars.
Didn't we just do this?